Hi, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm here with Kendra Leith, MIT D-Lab's Research and Evaluation Manager. We're going to be talking a little bit about the history of evaluation. Kendra, thanks so much for being here today. So Kendra, I wonder if you could start us off by just telling us a little bit about some of the earliest evidence of evaluation in history.
Yeah, so thanks, Lauren. So we actually see evidence of evaluation early as 5,000 years ago with the Egyptians who were measuring output for grain and also livestock production. You also see evidence from China as early as 4,000 years ago measuring and evaluating some of their civil service programs, as well as the Greeks. You see people like Socrates who were administering educational evaluations to make sure his students were learning what they needed to learn. So evaluation's been going on for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder if you could kind of take us from there to where we are now. What were some of the most influential sort of touch points in history as evaluation as a field progressed?
So a lot of the roots of modern evaluation, a lot of that came from evaluation of government programs in the U.S. and Western Europe. Yeah. You see evidence of this in the 1800s, early 1900s, where they started to put in place educational and social programs and really wanted to evaluate what was happening, how was that money being spent. You see, for instance, things like the accreditation of secondary schools and universities, accreditation of medical schools, etc. So you start to see the importance of evaluation in helping people determine what's actually happening. Although there was some growth in the early 1900s, really the expansion happened after World War II. You see things like Social Security, electrification, educational programs as well. So there was really a growth in evaluation and the need for evaluation starting in the 1930s. You also see an additional expansion with the introduction of new programs, particularly in the U.S. Through the New Deal in the 1960s, as U.S. and other countries really implement additional social programs. One of the seminal kind of pieces of legislation was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, set aside money to evaluate the quality of the teaching, the education the students were receiving. And so that was an important piece there. And so you see also evaluation happening during this time at the local level and state level in the U.S. and in Western Europe. But you also see evaluations happening in other countries, in developing countries, for instance, in Latin America. You see programs on family planning. In Africa, you see programs on agricultural production and things like that. And so measuring how well those programs are actually running. And so with that, there's this growth of programs, social and educational programs. There was a need to have additional evaluators. A lot of times at the beginning, government workers or whomever would be evaluating these particular programs, but there really was a need for additional support and capacity. And so you really start to see this kind of professionalization of the field. You see university programs popping up that are teaching evaluation and training these evaluators. You see journals starting to develop, including the Evaluation Review Journal. You also see the creation of societies, the Evaluation Research Society and the Evaluation Network, which ultimately combined and became the American Evaluation Association, which now has thousands of members and holds a yearly conference. And so you saw this growth of programs, of evaluators, the need to train them well. You're looking at from 1950, where you had about 1,500 evaluators, upwards to the mid-1980s, where you had over 13,000 evaluators. So there's really an extensive expansion of the evaluators and their training. And so many, people created research firms, academics took on contracts to be able to administer these evaluations, and government agencies set up offices to really measure how these programs were running.
Great. And so I guess to focus a little bit on this course in particular in the field of global development, what are some of the origins of development-specific evaluation? How did that sort of come to be?
So you see, with the end of World War II, you see really reconstruction and development efforts all across the world. And so, again, a need to be able to evaluate some of these programs. And in particular, in developing countries, you saw new programs being administered by by new organizations like the World Bank, like government agencies in the United Kingdom and Canada. And so really this need to be able to evaluate and assess kind of what was happening. You see the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development created, and they have really put an emphasis on effective evaluation and trying to support that through their Development Assistance Committee. So there's really been an emphasis on measuring these programs. A lot of this, the origins come from kind of an auditing and social science traditions. In particular, auditing, thinking about, are people complying with the requirements? Are they meeting the requirements? Are they, are these programs cost effective? And then looking at the social science traditions, which allowed us to be able to measure and collect a lot of that data. So the combination of those two things really influence kind of development evaluation in conjunction with the historical context as well.
Right. So looking at evaluation within global development as a field today, what are some of the emerging trends or ideas about how evaluation should be done?
Yeah. So you're starting to see more an emphasis on kind of quality and standards for evaluating programs. Through the Program Evaluation Standards in the U.S. that was created in 1994 by the American Evaluation Association, but more recently, the Development Assistance Committee has created the Evaluation Quality Standards back in 2006. And the World Bank has also created the Independent Evaluation Group. So you see more of these kind of standards developing, ensuring that we're doing research and monitoring and evaluation in an effective way, that we're making it kind of not only about compliance, but about making sure that those results are going to be used, that we're collecting data in the right ways. So really putting an emphasis on that as well. And you also see a number of you see additional kind of growth of professional organizations. You see building the capacity of governments and other entities in developing countries to be able to evaluate these programs effectively. And you see not only focus on kind of impact evaluations, but also on process evaluations. What are these programs doing? How are they working? What can we learn from them? So emphasizing the process piece as well. And then within the development space, you also have many drivers, including the Millennium Development Goals, the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, that really are affecting how evaluation is being set up and how it's being administered.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what does development evaluation look like today? What are some of the emerging ideas or trends that we're seeing in the field?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there's been both an emphasis on process and impact evaluations. In terms of looking at impact, there are ways of developing, kind of more experimental approaches to evaluation, using things like randomized control trials to demonstrate kind of causal effects. But you also see people creating quasi-experimental approaches as well, using things like propensity score matching and longitudinal studies to be able to document some of those outcomes and impacts over time. And then you also see non-experimental programs, case studies and things like that are also helping to explain kind of what's going on the ground. So there have been a number of different types of evaluations that are being done. Professor Bishanyal mentioned this in his discussion earlier. There is a space for other evaluations as well.
So in looking at technology evaluation specifically and CITE, how do those sorts of evaluations fit into the sort of overall development evaluation landscape?
So as I mentioned, there have been a variety of different types of evaluation. However, in developing country contexts, we are seeing a growth of products, water filters, solar lights, etc. But we're not necessarily seeing comparative evaluations of those products in this space. So it's hard for people to have the information to really make informed decisions about which products they want to try to select. And so CITE comes in and is able to evaluate different types of products across 3 different axes, including the suitability of the product, whether it is whether it's meeting technical specifications, whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, the scalability of the product, are the supply chains effective? Are the products getting where they need to go? And the sustainability of products, looking at, continued adoption over time, some of those outcomes, et cetera, that you're seeing. And so CITE has been able to fill a gap in the market where there haven't been these comparative evaluations really focused on technologies. And so they're providing useful information, particularly for procurement agencies and other non-governmental organizations, governments, etc., to make more informed decisions about which products are appropriate.
Great. Fantastic. Kendra, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.